Thank you so much for doing this interview with me. And, one of the things I'm really happy about doing this is because the fact that I've got so much respect for the work that you've done in film here in Canada. How did you end up becoming a filmmaker in the first place?
Well, thank you. I started off, it's one of those strange journeys where I think everybody who goes into film doesn't really know you think you're supposed to go to film school, but I never really went to film school. It was a strange journey where I started to go into video, and I staged an international video festival called Video Culture, which Much Music and City TV used to present. And it was a huge video event that I used to invite all these people like Brian Eno and people that I really admired in the arts became kind of like my mentors. And through doing this international video festival, I eventually started to go be mentored by all these great people and started to make my own shorts. And I made this film called Arrowhead, which Don McKellar stars in, which was shot in my neighborhood in Thorncliffe Park where I grew up. And that was like a kind of almost semi-autobiographical, and that was the film that kind of got me off the ground. And from there I did Project Grizzly, which is probably one of my most famous films about the guy who built the bear suit to encounter grizzlies at close quarters. And that sort of put me in a different kind of trajectory. But I was doing these kind of theatrical documentaries, but I always saw them as almost feature films. Like when I shot Project Grizzly, I shot it more like a Western than say a straight documentary. It's not like a PBS special. And I've started to more and more want my real documentary characters to act almost the way actors do. And I thought it's time to make a drama, and that's where Birdland comes in.
Let's get into Birdland. How did you come up with this story behind Birdland? Because, it's got so many different layers to it. There's trust, there's mistrust. You don't know who the good guy from the bad guy is. There's sex. There's so many different things. And I'm sitting there just going, how do you fit all this in less than 2.5 hours?
Well, Birdland is a fractured narrative that describes the kind of reality of the world we live in, the world of Facebook and social media, where we're all kind of actors in our own movies, so to speak. So Birdland is about this woman cop who she suspects her husband of an infidelity. She starts to place cameras in their house, in their condo, at his work. And she becomes obsessed with the woman that her husband is involved with and starts to act more and more like this woman till the point where she goes into this darker world. And then early on in the story, her husband is charged with murder, and he's like an ordinary kind of guy. He's an ornithologist. He's doing a show at the ROM about dinosaurs and birds. And all of a sudden, this mild-mannered ornithologist is charged with murder, and she is interrogated by one of her partners at work, a surveillance guy as well. She's interrogated with her own surveillance material. So all of a sudden, she's forced to confront what all these infidelities and strange things that you describe, these darker worlds that are behind the scenes, starts to be presented to her, and she starts to tell you this story that she prefers to tell you rather than necessarily what you're seeing. So it becomes a real battle between the surveilled world and what people prefer how they see themselves.
You mentioned about Facebook and stuff. I want to go in a little bit deeper in how you came up with this. Was it one day you were just on Facebook and you went, wow, could be an interesting story?
Well, it started a while back. There was I was in Montreal. I was in a cafe, and a woman walked by who reminded me of a woman that I used to go out with a number of years earlier who had committed suicide. So there's this darkness around her. And when I saw her, it really brought my imagination to life. It was almost like this charge of sex and death and what happened. And so I went home on the train back to Toronto. I wrote a short story about it. I was drawn into this sort of darkness of why I was drawn into that, and so I started to write the story based on just those feelings more than the actual events. And so surveillance became something that evolved later, because I feel surveillance is ubiquitous in our worlds, and it's kind of like we become actors in our own movies, as I said, and we start to post and project what we prefer how we want people to see ourselves versus what our friends are actually looking at going, oh man, they had a what are they trying to say?
I want to go in deeper in that. Does that really, I mean, I know we're looking at a darker side in this film, and it is a film, but does this reflect on what society is today? Because 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I would never even thought of a film like this could be made. But as you've mentioned, the way people today reflect themselves in becoming whoever they want on social media, it gets stronger and bigger every time.
Well, it's really drawing on the traditions of film noir, which is a medium that always is like holding up a mirror to the times, into both the darkness of the times and maybe more of a psychological portrait of the times. It's not a typical like cop show where you explain everything. It's like more of a mystery, and so it becomes the mood, the atmosphere, all the layers of imagery starts to take on its own meaning. And I force the audience to confront sort of what this means in their own world. And so it's not like something you can just go to go get a beer in the middle of. It's something you really have to, like reading a novel where you have to participate in the construction of what the story means. And I think it gives the audience more agency and allows them to look for their own kind of visual and sonic correspondences that gives it its own kind of personal meaning to each person. But I think the medium of Facebook and social media has really shifted how we see ourselves, how we behave socially, what we choose to reveal ourselves. And there's always what you see versus what the person's emotionally concealing, what they're hiding, their fears, their aspirations. But I think that in a way it becomes like a kind of confession. Like when you put the cameras on people, inadvertently people, I think, start to reveal themselves.
Who are the great actors who are involved in this? And I can only imagine they must be thrilled to be part of something like this. What a way to stretch, their own acting chops to something like this.
Well, this Birdland was a film where the actors really came on board because they wanted to express themselves and play on a bigger canvas. And a lot of them have done really well in television and have made films as well. Kathleen Munroe plays Hood, the lead character. David Alpay plays the ornithologist. Ben Ayres plays the cop who interrogates him. Joris Jarsky plays a club owner who's a very dark figure. And Stephen McCaddy plays this oil baron who's is the father of the two femme fatales, Munroe, who's played by Melanie Scrofano. She plays this tragic figure that is having the affair with the ornithologist. And Cara G is like a force of nature. She plays Cara G plays Hazel James, who's also the sister of the femme fatale Munroe, and she's a really interesting dark figure who she's basically got everyone wrapped around her finger and kind of enacts the strangeness that the ornithologist sort of acts out all the sense of loss that he has with the tragedy of this woman dying, Munroe James, and it starts to become a really complex kind of triangle.
Now, I understand, of course, this is opening up on the January 26th. There are Q&As that could be happening before that. Lots of things are going to be happening leading up to this film, and of course, the film's opening. Is there a website we can go to catch all the information, anything leading up to this?
Yes, there's a birdlandmovie.com, and at birdlandmovie.com, there's a website. And on social media, if you can find it on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all those through that handle.
And before we go what do you hope fans will get from this film?
Well, I hope that in a way, it's a portrait of a marriage, and it's a portrait of a certain kind of dark times where we live in fake news, and we know that climate change is real, but we're presented all these alternative narratives. So in a way, I want people to sort of to question their own existence, and when they're on Facebook or on camera and they're posting something, to maybe even just question what that means to them and what it means in the world. So in a way, it's a portrait of our times. So it's to sort of sit back and reflect in that, engage in it, and also be entertained by this strange journey that it could be you, and it's a kind of movie that doesn't let anyone off the hook. It makes you question who you are in these times we live in, and what kind of the way we all navigate social media with cameras, and we all are living in this surveilled world. And so I want you to experience that through the eyes of these characters I've created.
Looking forward to. Thank you so much for this interview, and again, looking forward to seeing the film.
Welcome. Thank you.